Superhero movies don't have the best reputation right now, so let's go back to the beginning and talk about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So today we're going to be doing something a bit new. So Daniel, can you let the people know what the hell we're going to be doing?
So this is the first episode of our new series called Superhero Hall of Fame. Superhero movies, after being the biggest thing for a decade throughout the 2010s, have kind of fallen off since Avengers Endgame, to the point where it seems to be a widespread opinion that superhero movies are no good and have never been good. We're just a fad to begin with. I think we all would like to disagree with that statement. I think we all like superhero movies beyond just the height of the MCU. So the idea behind this series is to go back through the best that the superhero movie genre has to offer and kind of ask the question, where these movies good to begin with, and what movies would you recommend to somebody who does not think that the superhero movie genre has anything going for it to begin with. So this week we are making the start with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man from 2002, which I think this is a good place to start because I think it really kickstarted the superhero movie genre, not because it was the first one, because it wasn't, but I think it was the first one that really unapologetically just realized its main character and just put it on the big screen and made it feel like what people knew from the comics. I think before this we had Batman 1989, which took itself quite seriously. And then we had 2000's X-Men, which I think that was a good realization of those characters, but it was still pulling its punches a lot. Like, it famously substituted the yellow spandex for the black leather, and they even make jokes in that movie. And Raimi Spider-Man does not do that at all, right? Like, it is just Spider-Man. And I think it's notable for that reason. And I think it is a good place to start for that reason. So what are your thoughts and histories with that movie?
Spider-Man was one of my early introductions into sort of the superhero genre as a whole. So I was never like a comic book person or anything like that. I only discovered superheroes through the movies, and Spider-Man was one of the very first ones. Kind of like looking back at it, you know, I've seen it many times throughout the years, but looking back at it again, sort of, having watching it recently, and obviously just having seen what's come since, I mean, it just gets everything right about doing sort of an origin movie for a character. I think everything in like Act 1 in terms of like how it's paced and letting us know who Peter Parker is to kind of like start off with, putting him on a hero's journey, you know, not making him perfect from the start, like, you know, having like flaws in his character where he kind of has to like learn lessons and learn the right things in order for him to become Spider-Man, and also, you know, deal with the challenges of, you know, being Spider-Man and that impacting his real life. So all of that, like looking back at it with fresh lenses, was just crafted perfectly. And you just like, it really like takes you on this again like origin journey with the character, especially like the scenes where he's like realizing his powers and he's like testing it out and he's like pushing his limits and he's like trying to sort of see what he's capable of doing and stuff like that. Like all of that just kind of like really captures the imagination, and you just, I don't know, it's just all like brilliantly executed in my opinion.
It has a good blend of everything in terms of like action, adventure, humor, thrill, and especially emotion. And I think emotion is something which I resonated more with in this superhero movie than the superhero movies that we have in today's time, or just in general. I think, of course, I'm sure there's been many like superhero movies where, you know, they were good as well. But I think with Spider-Man, what kind of like differentiates this from like other superhero movies is just like there was like matureness about this one, especially with, like I said, especially when it comes to like the emotional side of things in the movie. There's scenes where like Peter Parker makes you like want to cry for him, and his character is just so relatable. For me, the highlight and the thing which separates this movie from other superhero movies is just the matureness about it and the emotion that, you know, his performance and relatability that his character brings just with you as the audience. Because I think that with this movie, many characters in this movie, they actually look the part. As in, like with Peter's character, he's like this timid kid that no one really realize that notices, and he's like, he doesn't want to be popular, but obviously he wants the girl that like a lot of other people want, and he actually looks the part for his role. I feel like a lot of times other movies in general where the main character will play a character that's like, let's say, bullied or timid or scared or low in confidence, but they don't look the part. They look like they're just ripped, chiseled. It was refreshing watching again. It kind of opens your eyes to the lack of quality in terms of the movies that we get today.
Yeah, so rewatching this made me realize just how much I miss superhero movies, because this is not a perfect movie by any stretch. Like, if you really try, you can find issues with the plot and characterization and everything. But I think what this movie really gets right is the fun of the idea of a superhero. So we get, like you said, we get a very relatable main character who kind of gets these powers by accident and then at first uses them for personal gain and then kind of realizes that that is not the way to go and that he should use them to help other people. And then you've got the villain who causes trouble, and the hero learns how to use the powers and it eventually overcomes the villain, and then by the end is a fully realized version of himself. I think that part the movie really realizes really well, and it also really just fulfills the superhero fantasy and the Spider-Man fantasy. So basically, if you made like a list of things you would want, like if nobody had ever made a superhero movie and you had to come up with one from scratch, and you would make a list of everything that movie should have in it, this movie pretty much has almost all of them, I would say. And I think that makes this movie, even like 20 years later, really enjoyable, even though we've had 20 years of much more complex or sophisticated or polished superhero movies. But this has like a simplicity and a pure application of these tropes that I think a lot of movies today avoid because they think they are too corny or too basic or something like that. But then you go back to this movie and it actually does hold up. Like there are, like I've mentioned before, how like I don't really like Star Trek the original series, but the kind of Star Trek that I like would never have existed without the original series. You can say, okay, even though I don't want to rewatch this today, I recognize that it had to exist in order for the thing I like to exist. And I don't think you have to say that about this movie. I think this movie just holds up by itself. And if you like the idea of superheroes, this is a very pure version of that, I would say, that gives you what you want out of like this, like the platonic ideal of a superhero movie. And it delivers almost all of that.
You know what as well? One thing that I found very interesting about this film, I think like his reasoning for him actually being a superhero was warranted, and it was like realistic, and it was the whole, like, you know, the line with great power comes with great responsibility. I think that was conveyed so well in terms of just like the storyline, and even like the action sequences like matched, and like it matched the storyline so well. Like sometimes in superhero movies nowadays, the stuff that you're seeing doesn't make sense. It's like there's just a lot of fillers that they add in because it looks great, especially when it comes to CGI, right? But with this one, the fight scenes and the storyline just like it was so cohesive, and it just made sense.
I think like you can see how basic the CGI is in many places, and there are things that where the seams are showing a little bit, and you can't, and you can kind of see that if this was done today, it would look better. But I think given their limitations, I think part of those limitations is that you have to think very hard about what you put on screen and how you realize it. And that I think is something that's gotten a bit lost with the kind of CGI we have today, where you can put anything on screen so you don't have to think very hard about what it is you want to put on screen. And here I think you can tell that they had to think very hard, okay, how do we make the web slinging work, and what set pieces do we create, and what breaks the budget, and what will look hokey with the tools we have, and how can we kind of get around that a little bit. Like there are things here that look a little bit hokey, like the goblin suit. It does not look all that great. It clearly looks like a plastic suit.
They like it.
I think like if you just take it by itself and just look at it and say, okay, does this look good? Then it looks really plastic and really exaggerated and stuff like that. But then you put like Willem Dafoe in it, and he just acts like this is Shakespeare and like just gives it 120%, and he just makes it like he just pulls it off. And then at the same time he's fighting Spider-Man, who has this suit that is exactly how Spider-Man is supposed to look, right? Everything is so earnest and so sincere that the fact that some parts of it are maybe a bit corny, or maybe look a little bit cheap or something like that, it kind of just disappears in the earnestness, I think.
I think what this movie does is that it really does a good job of immersing you into the world, so that you don't really question like certain things. Like, you know, at no point do you really question, you know, the Green Goblin being in a suit or whatever, because of, like, again, like you mentioned, the strong performance that Willem Dafoe put into it. And then likewise, like all of sort of the kind of like movements that Spider-Man is doing, you know, the web slinging, even like something like the janky CGI in any of it. It's because it's like everything is like, you know, well acted, well performed. They've like done a really good job of like, you know, getting you emotionally invested into sort of the characters, the character story, and sort of kind of like what's unfolding on the screen. Is that you can like quite easily like forget about it or like look past it. So like at no point when I was like looking at Green Goblin's suit did I think, oh, maybe this could have been done better or this like whatever. I was like, oh, like this is just the Green Goblin of this particular like universe, and sort of this is the suit that he sort of was trying to like sell to the military or whatever, and he's like now kind of like using it to kind of like run amok across like the whole city. That's what the movie does really well. It's just like that immersion that's making you feel like you're part of it. Even when you was like talking about like the web slinging and stuff like that in it, you kind of like feel you're like with him when you're doing it, or you kind of like feel like you're part of it. Really.
For me, I thought the Green Goblin outfit looked great. I think that's actually one of the reasons. Grass is another reason why green is my favorite color, but Green Goblin, I remember, was one of the reasons why I ended up liking the color green. I think he fits. I think the suit fits the character, and the reason why is because mainly for that menacing smile. And I think obviously with the actor Willem Dafoe, I think with he always had like that menacing smile as well. So that's why it kind of fitted well with the actual suit, because obviously the suit had the menacing smile too. And whenever you'd see the face of that sort of menacing smile, that was like one of my favorite parts. So for me, I thought the suit looked great.
I mean, it makes zero sense that the military would design it to look this way.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's like why would you make a glider that looks like bat wings, right? Or like with like jagged edges and stuff like that? Why are you building a suit? I don't know if the helmet was designed like that from the beginning or if Osborn made it that way. But it's like I think one of the problems I have with the Green Goblin here is that a lot of the same issues I have with the Joker from Batman 1989, which is that it's not very clear why the Green Goblin persona is the way it is. Like, why does Osborn pick that? Right? It's not like that's iconography that's been around before, and so now he uses it. It just happens. But I think similar to the Joker in Batman 1989, once he is the Green Goblin, he's amazing in it. Like he's a lot of fun. He does a lot of the stuff you would expect him to. I don't think he's the closest to how he is in the comics. I think in the comics he's got more of a Halloween thing going on. I've never read that many Spider-Man comics. But like if you just take this movie by its own, you've got a menacing villain and you've got a noble hero, and they fight each other and they try to kind of prevail against each other while kind of having this ethical argument, right? I think Green Goblin works really well as an antagonist that forces Peter Parker to become Spider-Man and kind of step up and take the responsibility, because he is the only one who can stop the villain. And in order to do that, you have to handwave a little bit why there's a Green Goblin in the first place. But once you're on board with that, I think it's really amazing.
Those are fair criticisms. In terms of like the design and like why it looked like that and stuff. I think one thing the movie did well on the Green Goblin side was one kind of justifying why Norman Osborn would push himself kind of like to the limit and sort of take the human trials on himself, because like, you know, about to cut funding and this and the other, so like they make it understandable like why he decides to do that. And then of course like they explain about like, you know, how it creates like psychosis or something like that, or like turns you a little bit mad from like the people that have trialed it and whatever. So just like getting to that point, and then everything that kind of like just then happens afterwards doesn't really need like any type of like rhyme or reason. Of course he's like going after the people that he felt like wronged him or like in his way and stuff like that, but you know, the chaos that he creates doesn't need any rhyme or reason. I think that stuff like that is what's missing in some of the villains that we get, where it's just kind of cookie cutter bad guy where there isn't really much going on about them. I feel like what this does well is that it gives enough of a backstory as to sort of how the villains sort of came about, without needing to make them sort of super sympathetic, making sort of the audience like, you know, understand it from their perspective. It's just like, okay, no, this is how these set of like, you know, chain of events can turn sort of someone like this to a villain, and then it then works again, like you said, as an antagonist to sort of help Spider-Man become who sort of he needs to be in this movie.
Yeah, the only real problem I have with it is why the Goblin, but everything else, like who he goes after and why, and what he wants and how he's basically talked into it by the sinister part of his psyche and all of that's amazing. It's just why the Goblin and why is he green? But that's the only thing. Beyond anything else, he's fun. He's larger than life. He's got a clearly defined personality, and he's just fun to watch. Every time he attacks, every time he argues with himself, it's just enjoyable. Like, there's nothing bland about the Green Goblin in this, right?
Well, the Green Goblin is evil, and goblins are green in general. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there doesn't really necessarily have to be like a specific reason.
It's just more so in the context of, you know, if the military are asking for him to design a suit for them, like why would it be a goblin suit and not just like a kind of like an army, you know, prerequisite suit or something like that? Yeah,
I hear what you guys are
and
saying.
it might be that he makes the helmet afterwards, but it's just like the entire thing just looks evil. I think that is one of those things that's kind of circular, where it's supposed to be that because we know what it's supposed to look like at the end. And I think that's the one part that I wish that was a little bit clearer in terms of his thought process of why this.
Kind of like moving on to kind of discussing like how the movie treated some of its like kind of like side characters and stuff like that in this, because like again that's like a big part of like all these other movies is where you have like, you know, your comedic relief character and stuff like that. You have like all your extras that just kind of like there and don't really like serve much purpose to the story. And I feel like with some characters it did it really well in terms of like how sort of the characters served sort of the story and served Spider-Man in terms of like helping him grow to sort of be what he needed to be. So of course, you know, you got people like Uncle Ben, who's like iconic with like an iconic line in this. You got like Aunt May, who's kind of like he's like cornerstone and like sort of like his home essentially. And then of course you got like the love interest. I actually did think the dynamic between the two of them was like really good up until like they do the upside down kiss, and then kind of after that she turns into a bit of a damsel in distress and she kind of gets a little bit annoying, and the whole like dynamic between them kind of like starts to fall apart for me up until like the end where she starts to kind of like confesses her love for him, and then he kind of like realizes that as long as he has people that he cares about, there's always like something to lose if he's Spider-Man. So again, that, you know, that character does a really good job in terms of like feeding into sort of or shaping how he manages the sort of persona of Spider-Man. The only one that I didn't like, what's normal knows, was Harry Osborn. It didn't quite like for that one. It didn't quite make sense as to why they were best friends in this at all. Like if anything, it like I kind of questioned like why they were friends in the first place, because like he kind of like took his girl, didn't really tell him about it. Was little, I don't know. I just felt like it was like a little bit shady towards Peter Parker in this, and I don't know how much he served Peter Parker's journey and like Spider-Man's journey in this movie, but I feel like all the other characters had some type of role to play, which was key and was sort of was really needed in this. And I get like Harry Osborn is like the famous like best friend or whatever, but I just feel like that's probably the only relationship that wasn't handled as well in this movie.
Well, they are supposed to have been friends for a long time. They're childhood friends, right? And so even though they've turned into very different people, they are still friends, right? And at this point, nothing has happened that would be a deal breaker for Peter, right? And also he doesn't have that many friends. So I imagine he would put up with quite a bit before it gets too much. And he gets close in this movie, right? Where he's clearly not okay with him and Mary Jane dating. Also, in terms of the supporting character, J. Jonah Jameson is exactly what he's supposed to be.
Yeah, I forgot about him. Perfect casting.
Yeah, so that sequence where he goes into the wrestling ring, it's also like that's not so much a staple supporting character, but that is also like one of the milestones of what Peter Parker is supposed to go through, and that also works basically right off the page. So I think what this all adds up to is this movie, I think, works because of its characters, right? I think it takes quite a while before he even puts on the costume. Like he gets the powers fairly early on, but then it takes a while before he becomes Spider-Man and before he actually does any superheroing. And in that time, we are introduced to just him as a person and all his friends and family and all the obligations that he has and how he's trying to do right by everybody. And if you are really into the Spider-Man comics, I've seen a whole bunch of opinions about how it gets this part of the character wrong or that part or whatever. But just if you take this movie by itself, one thing it really does really well, it gives you a really good idea of what this Peter Parker is like and why he does, and how he relates to other people and what they mean for him and how they've shaped him. And so when he becomes Spider-Man, he's suddenly torn into even more different directions. Like this whole thing about being spread too thin between his obligations, that I think that really comes into play in the second movie, but it's already here, right? He wants to do right by Aunt May and Uncle Ben. He wants to do right by his friends. He's got obligations at school and everything, and then being Spider-Man is added to that, and that really comes full circle in the second movie. But I think the beginnings of that are here, and he wants to do right by everybody. I think that's really established very firmly, and because of that, I think that is kind of the skeleton that everything else hangs on. So I think the two things that make this movie really work is that we care about Peter Parker and we get a good version of Spider-Man. And those two things kind of exist at the same time, and they have to exist at the same time. And I don't know that the other versions of Spider-Man have really pulled that together. Where like at least one of the two tends to be a little bit weak maybe, or there's some weird thing in there. And this is just, we're gonna do Spider-Man and we're gonna get the essence of him right. Like there are little things like they changed how the webs work. Like in the comics, he's got mechanical web spinners, and he's got organic web spinners. And back then, a lot of people had a real problem with that, about how it breaks the character or something like that. And I would say that's not important to, like, how exactly he gets his webs is not important. What's important is that he has the webs and what he does with them. And I think this movie focuses on all the right things, where it really makes us care about Peter Parker and his problems. And I think that is the essence of what a Spider-Man story is, right? It's not just about making the webs thing look good, but that's also part of it. It's about Peter Parker and his problems, and that we have to care about that. I think the movie is really good at figuring out which parts of that are the most important, and then it realizes that as close to perfect as it could. Like there's a reason why we've not had an Uncle Ben since then. Right, there have been multiple versions of Spider-Man since then. I'm focusing on the live-action movies here. I have not seen any of the recent cartoons, but like not in the Sonyverse version and not in the MCU version is there an Uncle Ben, because this version just does it correctly. Right, it does everything you would want out of the Uncle Ben plot, and so there's not much you can do with Uncle Ben that isn't just rehashing this movie. But it's been 20 years, and nobody has been willing to get near it. Also, J. Jonah Jameson is kind of like, he does appear in the MCU, but not quite in the same way, right? They had to come up with an alternate interpretation of him. There's a bunch of things like this, right? Like where this movie is just doing the definitive version of this basically on the first try. And I think that's really interesting, that it really figured out, okay, what's important about Spider-Man, and we're going to do that.
I think the Andrew Garfield one did have an Uncle Ben, but like that's like kind of like by the point. I think
it's been a while since I watched those, but it's got,
yeah, I was gonna say,
Aunt May appears in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think the Raimi version has the best Aunt May of all of them. She's just the surrogate parent, grandmother, role model, moral backbone, like all in one, and it's just what the character is supposed to be. I'll double check that, but I don't believe Uncle Ben is alive in the Amazing version, but I'll double check that. But if he is, then I don't think they do the whole he gets killed by the mugger and stuff like that. Like it's not like he may be there, but he doesn't do the iconic thing, because the 2002 version already did it.
I was going to say as well, with Uncle Ben's character, I think his role was like so perfect when it comes to cause and effect. And I was thinking about this as well as a question. Do you guys think the reason why, first, well, I already know, actually, no, I do know your opinions on obviously the hero movies, superhero movies, of today's day and age. But do you guys think I think cause and effect is definitely something which is big, right? And I think cause and effect was executed perfectly in this Spider-Man. Do you think cause and effect is missing in today's superhero movies? In terms of like, the reasoning for why superheroes have their motive and do what they do. Because I feel like with Peter Parker, like his reasoning for like that, like his reasoning for what he did next was so warranted, and like his journey and his timeline, like everything was just like, it's just the whole sequence of it made sense. I think what would have ruined the movie is if he got the superhero, he got the powers. That was before Uncle Ben's death, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, before Uncle Ben's death. Sorry. But yes, I think if he got it afterwards, then it kind of would have, it would have. I thought for me, I think it would have been generic. So I think it was perfect that he actually ended up having his superpowers before that scene, because now it's like, okay, it fits in well with the whole great power comes great responsibility. Because in that section of the film, it was like, okay, now like he's in a position where he can like take advantage of his power, and it kind of does show the after effect of what that happens, and it leads to negative consequences. So in the long run. So back to my question: do you think cause and effect, and obviously the reason for why these superheroes do what they do, like pretty much the introduction of the superhero's journey in terms of like their superpower, and then obviously their decision that they're going to make in terms of like Tobey Maguire, he chose to make the decision that he's going to pretty much protect the city by fighting crime. So do you think cause and effect and the reason for what they do is as good as it was back in the day, and as like the tone of it as serious? Because my opinion is that I think it's very like childish, and it's not really isn't great is what I'm trying to say. It isn't great in comparison to back in the day.
I think I'm like as you're saying all that, I'm like trying to like rack through my brains of like all the like recent movies, and how many of them have done kind of like true origin stories of their characters, and it's difficult to try and like think of like examples of where I mean, you've got things. I don't know if you guys watched Blue Beetle, like that. That's one. You got things like Shang-Chi and stuff like that. But I don't like. I feel like where we've got this like ever expanded universe, you kind of have like all of these new characters just kind of like pop up, and some of them just pop up with the powers anyway. So it's like, you're not always getting to know that true origin story. And I feel like kind of what was different about this compared to like compared to the ones that I've got like on my mind was that he had like the morally grey period in the movie. And I'm trying to remember like if there's been any sort of superhero movies of recent times where they had like that moral grey area before like really defining who they are and like what they want to be. But I feel like in this sequence where he's kind of like let the mug go, and then obviously like the mugger shot Uncle Ben, there's even like the scene where like the mugger falls out the window and he doesn't try to save him at all, and like he's like kind of like misusing his powers before kind of like realizing he could have like stopped his uncle from dying, and like he could have like, because of like one thing, something else happened and whatever like that, and he then had to like replay some of like Uncle Ben's like last words in his head and stuff like that. So I feel like something like that. Or again, this is off the top of my head. I can't remember like all the movies like exactly, but off the top of my head, I feel like that particular part of the journey seems to be missing in some of the more modern movies. But again, like correct me if I'm wrong on that aspect of it.
I think one thing that's kind of missing is, so first of all, origin stories are kind of out of fashion. And I think if an origin story is done well, it can be a totally valid template for telling a story. Like I remember Doctor Strange, I think that was 2016. It's just a straight up origin story, and I think it works great because that really goes into his motivation in terms of why be a hero, why use his powers the way he does, and things like that. And if you don't do that, then I think you run the risk of it being a little bit obligatory, where the hero is the hero because they are the hero and not because they have a good reason to be. You don't have to do that with an origin story, but you have to, like Blade famously does not get an origin story. Like we are told what his origin is, but we don't get an origin story for him, right? He just is who he is, but we still get a complete picture of why he does what he does, right? So for some characters, it's not necessary. But I think one of the things that sets apart good superheroes from the mediocre ones is that the good superheroes, as in the popular ones that carry movie after movie and story after story, have like a strong psychology at their center, where you have a very strong idea of who they are and why they do what they do and why they do it the way they do it. And I think Spider-Man is up there, and I would add to that Batman, Captain America, Iron Man, like the MCU versions at least, Superman as well. Like you have just a very clear idea of why these people are heroes and why their heroism takes the form that it does, like their tactics and their methods and how they use their powers and stuff like that, and who they fight and why. The Arrow TV series was really strong about this too, where because it was a TV series, it took a lot of time establishing why that character did what he did. And whenever you do that, I think that's when superhero stories are at their strongest. And I think as the superhero genre grew into its decadent age, like in the late 2010s, going into now, we kind of skipped that part a little bit or hand-wave it a little bit, and then assume that these heroes do heroic things because they are the protagonists. And they don't have as clearly defined reasons for doing what they do. And as a result, their stories are not nearly as compelling. And Peter Parker has this really strong and compelling human and emotional core, which is that, like you said, he used his powers for selfish reasons once, and he paid a massive price for it, and he wants to do right by everybody, and therefore he gets stretched too thin, and so he disappoints everybody, even though he keeps trying, right? And like that is something that makes him different. Like he's not just a collection of powers. He's like a person who happens to have powers, and the powers put him into the position to do extraordinary things. And so his choice of what to do with that is what's interesting. And I think a lot of, especially like lower tier, not the high, like the top tier characters, but once you start going into the slightly more obscure ones, a lot of the time don't have this, where especially the less well-known characters have this, where they are basically just reduced to their power set, or maybe who they fight, but they are not as fleshed out as people. And when that happens, it's just a generic action movie, and it kind of loses its specialness, or it loses its unique aspect. And I think this movie, so Spider-Man in general is really well defined when it comes to that. And then this movie just gets that part really, really right. And I think that's why it works.
And that's why a lot of the kind of newer characters that we're being introduced to in the MCU seem to be falling flat, because we're not getting that well-rounded kind of perspective of the character. We're not kind of like truly understanding who they are, like why they're doing what they're doing, and this, that, and the other. It's just like, okay, here's a new hero for you guys to like, because you like all the other heroes that we've liked before, and it just doesn't work, and it just doesn't resonate. That's why I'm not surprised that we haven't had things like a new Shang-Chi movie. And I know people really like that one, but for me personally, I just never really resonated with him as a character, and like his struggles, or like his personal whatever. And like other characters, like trying to think of like who else they try to introduce. The MCU movies like past Endgame, I've really gone blank on, just because they've not really been super memorable outside of like maybe like a few like Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and stuff like that. But
yeah, let me bring up the list. So one example of this is Wonder Woman. I don't think Wonder Woman has a story, at least not in the movies. What is exactly her story that unfolds throughout the DCEU? I don't think there really is one. And I like the first one just fine. I think it's got some really good bits and some not good bits. But like, how do you boil down her character in terms of what she's about in the way you can do it with a Spider-Man or with a Batman? And I don't think it's really possible. And I think that's one of those reasons why that character tends to not really take off, because while like there's a bunch of things to like about her, like you can like the antiquity angle, you can you can like the female empowerment angle, you can like maybe like particular performances or whatever, but there isn't really that core to it, and that might exist in the comics, I don't know, but in the movies it hasn't really existed, and that would for me be an example of like where all the ingredients are there. Like I can like in the first Wonder Woman movie specifically, there's a couple of really cool moments that really stand out, even though I've watched that movie only once when it came out. What is it, 9 years now at this point? But like as a person, she's not that interesting. And she could be, but like it's like all the pieces are there, but there's like this hollow center that has never been filled. And because of that, I think that character has never really, like everybody wants her to succeed, but she's never really been like a top tier character for that reason, in the movies at least.
Yeah, I was like really kind of like not begging for it, but I was like really wanting it as well. Like when Batman vs Superman came out, and then they had like this whole like big three or of them two with Wonder Woman, etc. I was like, okay, cool. Like, let me see what DC can do with these characters. And of course, like everything that unfolded after that was whatever. I personally was never really too much of a fan of the first one, and then the second one was kind of like even worse than that. But again, it was just like another case, like you said, of just like failing to make me resonate or like really care about the character, and like kind of like have me invested in their story or what they were about at all. And I feel, and like another example of this as well is like Black Widow. And I feel like what they did really well was in the movies that she was cameoing in, they gave enough like tease and enough like intrigue into like her backstory, her character, etc. But I just feel like for her, it was just unfortunate that her film came a little bit too late, and I feel like they didn't really bank on having a female superhero lead until it was like way too late for her to have her own movie. But it would have been quite interesting, because there was like a lot of like good setup and a lot of like good pieces in there about her background and what she was like before she became a superhero, and all the red that she had on her ledger, and how she was trying to like wipe that slate clean by doing all of these good things, and like no matter how many good things she did, it could never really erase her past, essentially. And I feel like it was just unfortunate on her part that that movie came a little bit too late when she'd already died in the main universe, and people weren't really as invested. And I don't think the movie handled that her character really that well either, to be fair, in that.
I think that character is an example of she's a different character in every appearance, and I like more than half of those appearances, but they don't add up to a person, right? They don't add up to a coherent idea of what this character is about and what her place is in the story, right? She just makes a couple of appearances, and a bunch of them are enjoyable, and they serve their purpose, right? But there's no really compelling character at the core of it. So by the time she does get her own movie, it's kind of like people have kind of given up on that idea, I think. And to bring this back to Raimi Spider-Man, like that just does not happen with this Spider-Man, right? You like, I think with this, all of the pieces come together. You have the powers, where the web slinging and the webs and the wall crawling and all of those pieces you would expect all are there, and they work, and they're interesting. And then you've got the action sequences, which are informed by his power set. Like I think the one where Green Goblin crashes the parade and Spider-Man jumps from one balloon to the next and stuff like that. Like that is something that only Spider-Man could have done. Like if you slot in any other hero, it would just unfold differently, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got the tone of it is pretty much what it's supposed to be. It's a mix between lighthearted action and kind of somber character stuff. And it kind of balances those two tones well, and it's the right tone for that character. And then you've got the human core that kind of holds all of those pieces together. And if that all adds up together, then that is a proper movie, right? And if you change any of those pieces, then it becomes a different movie. And you couldn't just make the same movie with a different character, right? So it's too anchored in who Peter Parker is as a person. And then everything else is informed by that, and each of the pieces connect to the other ones. And even if you quibble with the characterization, or if you prefer mechanical web shooters over organic ones, or if you think that there was this Peter Parker makes too few jokes, or whatever, like one of the criticisms I've seen is that this version of Peter Parker is too introverted to be the kind that makes a lot of quips. And when he does, it feels a little bit forced, and I kind of see where that's coming from. But I think those are all details, and what this movie gets right is the big picture. And that, I think, is why it holds up even after 20 years, even though this movie comes across as a bit corny and a bit childish is the wrong word, but it's like it doesn't quite take itself quite as seriously as a Spider-Man movie that comes out today would. I think this movie just has a lot of it figures out the foundations that it needs to get right, and it gets those right, and then it has fun with the premise and with the pieces, and I think that's why it works.
Agreed.
So if somebody came up to you and said, I've seen the big superhero movies and I didn't really care for them, I thought they were kind of generic action schlock, and I don't see why people are so into these characters, would you recommend 2002 Spider-Man, and why?
100%. This is a great way to sort of truly understand what a good superhero movie sort of canon should be.
Same, I agree. I think it's definitely, when it comes to, I think this Spider-Man would definitely kind of like suck them in due to relatability, because I think if they were to watch the superhero movies now, I think it's, I wouldn't say intentionally, but it does kind of like move away from like the whole realism aspect of things. Whereas with this one, it's, even though it's sci-fi, it's science fiction, it still has it still kind of falls into the world, into the real world. So stuff like, Uncle Ben getting killed due to the whole like robbery, and obviously trying to get the girl in high school, and yeah, there is stuff like that in Spider-Man, but I think just in this one it felt more down to earth. So I'll definitely say the down to earth aspect of it is definitely selling point of the film, which I think they would definitely like.
Yeah, I agree. I think this emphasizes the character aspect, like that we're not just here for the action sequences, we're here to see Peter Parker's struggles. And it gets the Spider-Man fantasy right. Like I think if you watch this, you have a decent idea of who and what Spider-Man is and what a Spider-Man story is about. It's also the right amount of fun, right? It's not too bogged down in like continuity, or it's not concerned with setting up anything else. It's just, here's Spider-Man, enjoy. And that's kind of the movie. And so for that reason, I think this is a decent, like maybe I wouldn't say it's the best one. I don't think like as a movie, I think if you really put the story under a microscope, there's a lot of things that don't quite hold up. But just in terms of getting what the appeal of Spider-Man is in specifically, as well as superheroes in general, I think this is a pretty good showcase.
It looks like that might be the end of today's discussion. Guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I'm going to pass it on to my boy Hervey.
Let us know your thoughts down below. What did you think about Spider-Man if you've seen it before? Is this sort of one of the best superhero movies? Is this one of the best sort of origin hero movies as well? And let us know as well, is Tobey Maguire sort of your Spider-Man, or sort of did you like the ones that came afterwards? Let us know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And of course, if you liked what we discussed today, tell a friend. And if you thought we were just a bunch of idiots and we didn't know what we were talking about, then tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Thanks, guys. We will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.